That is full, all this is full. It is out of completeness that completeness comes. When completeness or fullness is taken out of fullness, it is only fullness itself that remains. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. We have to go back a little bit and just make an overall review. But just to pick up on this question of renunciation, as monks, we take a vow of renunciation. And renunciation implies poverty, it implies celibacy, it implies all of those things, but it also implies service. It doesn't imply withdrawal. So here's the thing. When we talk about detachment and all those kinds of things, we're talking about a contrast. We're talking about a contrast between detachment and attachment to what? Attachment to the body and attachment to the environment that the body responds to. Very naturally, we assume that this world is all there is. But all our difficulties and problems will come because we're picking up scenes from the outside. The difficulty is not in the objects. The difficulty is in our evaluation of them. So in the very first instance, even in the peace prayer, we are told that actually there is a oneness. Failure to understand this oneness and to divide it into duality is a mistake. And there's a consequence to that mistake. Suffering is the consequence to that mistake. So if we were to say, what is the theme of this Isha Upanishad? It is there in the very first stanza, and it is even inherent in the peace prayer. It answers the question, what is this thing called God? Who am I? And we should inquire into this. And there's every reason why we should inquire into this. So there are 18 verses. The Isha Upanishad is admired for its brevity and its depth. And that is why it's normally held as the first Upanishad that we study. So the first stanza is telling us that Brahman is everything and everything is covered. There are two aspects to this. And you see, it's a bit like the light bulb. The light bulb, we understand that when the light bulb is operating, there's an enormous power behind it, contained in an electromagnetic field. We call this particular aspect, particular wave within the electromagnetic field as electricity. So electricity, we can't blame electricity for faulty light. We blame the light bulb, no doubt. But the light bulb that we have in this analogy is the human body and mind. And it is absolutely perfect. Perfect in the sense that it is operating in a regular way, in a well-designed way. Imagine how biological life starts off from a single cell and then decides to make a cooperative of it. And after many, many years, thousands and thousands and thousands of years, we arrive at such a complex arrangement and we take it for granted. And then we misidentify and say, I am this cooperative of cells. It's clearly a mistake, but it's not how we feel. And there's a reason why we don't feel like that, because in this game of life, we have to have some operational basis for moving and working and playing and all the rest of it, and thinking and relationships and all of those kinds of things. So to respond to this seeming network of events, we have to be responsive. But as we grow in wisdom and our understanding, starting from maybe some painful experience or some curiosity, then we start investigating, and we want ultimately cognitive experience. The whole aim of the Upanishads is anubhuti, direct cognitive experience. So proportionately, the more we're attached to the world, the more we are estranged from God, to put it simply. The less we are attached to the world, the more we are attached to the reality that we call God. It's as simple as that. Therefore, when this realization dawns of the deeper value of things, then what we call renunciation or detachment occurs by itself, quite naturally. St. Paul tells us something like, as a child, I used to enjoy playing with toys and so on. We can exaggerate the example in a funny way. I used to put my father's Wellington boots on and trample in the water and the mud and so on and so forth. I no longer do these things. That's not quite true. I also do them now. But, you know, you get the idea, you see. Scrunching on the leaves in autumn. What a beautiful delight that is. But you see, the value has gone, or the value has shifted. So what we did in our childhood, in our immature state, we outgrew it. So the product of outgrowing our immature attitude is an automatic revaluation that results in a shift in attitudes and a detachment. And we can do it, of course, consciously and deliberately, and monks do that. But the vast bulk of society will do it differently. They'll want to live their full lifespan, 100 years. It is said in palmistry, if you take your hand and look at the lifeline and calculate from the very, very edge right down to the very edge under the thumb, that's approximately 100-year lifespan. So they say. And they must be correct because everybody quotes they. They said this, they said that. So you can pretty much calculate that if you want to live a full life, a useful life, then you have to be detached. Detached from what? Not detached from actions. You have to engage in the actions, but to be detached from the effects, the results, because that produces only one thing, anxiety. The mental health difficulties that we have today are as a result of anxiety put into the future. And regret is because we're regurgitating all the things in the past. Leave the past where it is and leave the future to unfold by itself. But right now, we can put something useful in. So one thing that comes out in this Upanishad is this immanence. This is right here and now. If you understand that this thing that is permeating everywhere is exactly your own innermost self, then wherever you look, you'll find it. So these are some important concepts in this. And the first verse will tell us that this Brahman is everything. In fact, it's the only thing. It covers everything. It permeates everything. And we can compare it in a way to some other things that we know which are permeating everywhere. If you have a clay pot, you don't ask, when will the air get inside it? The air is inside it and outside it, both simultaneously. How does that work? How can it be? So our spatial awareness maybe plays a little trick on us. The same question. If the whole universe is expanding, if space is expanding, into what is it expanding? It's a silly question because this concept of expanding is from within the sphere. If you take the sphere and put it in a box, that would be a different question. But we're actually asking the question because we're inside the sphere, which means there's no outside of it. So it's a kind of abstract concept that goes against our spatial conformity that wants things in a box. The more we study truth in science, the more we find this unity and this permeation going on. So that leads us to the conclusion that other things don't have the value we thought it was, and therefore All the effort in acquiring things is actually meaningless. And much of our difficulty, much of our pain, and much of our mental torture that we give ourselves is because we want something. We want to possess something. Let's put it in under the generic term of wealth. Then the next question is, well, whose is the wealth? Is it not this entity, this Isha, this Lord that is covering everything? And so we have to look at things in a different way. And so the second stanza will tell us that don't abandon all this action. If you want to do that consciously, that's one route, says Shankaracharya. But the other route, that's also fine, because every movement, every action binds you, because every movement is within the encapsulated ignorance. How to free yourself from that? Use that itself. How to overcome this apparent universe, you use it. Now, Sri Ramakrishna gives a beautiful example. If you have a thorn in your foot, you take another thorn and you remove that. So very often there's a misunderstanding. I was in a certain place, Kilkenny it was, in a study group, and one person said, we should really get rid of all this Maya. Of course, in a sense, yes. But Maya, how do you do it? You do it through Maya. You don't have a military coup against it. You take the instrumentation that you have. So what we have is a revealing thing, is a capacity and function that can reveal. But the other side of it is the hiding side. Things are hidden and things are projected. And this balance of hiding and projecting, all of this puts us into a kind of a trap. Generally, we call this trap ignorance. And then the third stanza will tell us it encourages the seeker. The seeker of freedom, it says, what's the alternative? The alternative is a pointless life, a purposeless life. So that if you have any symptoms of this, if you're feeling depressed, if you're feeling that the COVID situation is getting you down, if you feel that there's somehow, no deeper meaning in life, it's human nature to feel this from time to time. At those moments, or even if it's a permanent structure, is a kind of psychological darkness, asurya, a kind of absence of sunlight, if you want to put it that way. And when you have this state, then you go into blinding darkness as a result. You can describe this as a lack of knowledge, because the light of knowledge, when that comes, it gives you purpose. And when you don't understand this unity and this revaluation of things, naturally, without that conviction, life becomes completely pointless. Now, it's fashionable today to be something like a neo-atheist and be persuaded by some of the evangelical atheists around. We know who they are, because famously everybody knows, The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins and a few things like that. So we know. But is there, can we ask them a question? Well, is there any purpose? Now, there's one particular Oxford mathematician, he's a chemist. His name is Peter Atkinson, very famous man, very clever man, seemingly, intellectually clever. So he says, asking what the purpose is or the why of it is a silly question. And he was bold enough to tell this to, I think it was Prince Charles in England and so on. And there's an arrogance to that attitude, because in that case, what is your meaning of life? Now, his meaning of life then will be a local meaning. That is, from day to day, you may have a purpose. Go to the shops, study this, give a lecture if you're a chemist, do some research work, and so on. In other words, get up, eat, work, sleep, and repeat it. No other meaning or purpose in life. So if you ask why do you have to do any good, why not you do the worst you possibly can if it serves your meaning or it serves your purpose? This is a position called utilitarianism or consequentialism, that the only reason why you don't rob a bank is you don't want to get arrested. No other higher meaning in it. No ethics and morality. Ethics and morality you have, but there's no real reason why you should have. And yet I have no doubt that this man has an ethical position on most things, a moral position on those things, and the moral and ethical judgment comes against religion. So they're saying, yes, I believe in objective morality because I think religion is wrong. That's the kind of thing they're saying. These are the kind of things they're saying. But that means then that there is really theoretically no purpose, no deep purpose in life, which means that when your boat in life gets battered, you have no understanding that will rescue you. And so that's the difficulty. And many people, of course, find that when the universe impinges on us in a more painful way, it can be an opportunity. Things can swing either way. You can give up and drown, or you can swim, catch the boat, and move on. I think there are many inspiring stories of people lost at sea, surviving, maybe even for many months. No doubt in a desperate physical condition, but their ingenuity, their will to survive, all of that overrides everything. So certainly everybody would admit, either tacitly or otherwise, that there is a purpose in life because everybody understands I exist. I don't know of anybody who says, by the way, I don't exist. One person I came across said that. And then the fourth stanza will tell us about the glories of the absolute. So does the fifth, so does the sixth, so does the seventh, and so does the eighth. And it's worth picking up that study a little bit to see how we go from there. So a remarkable statement comes in the fourth stanza. It tells us something that seems to be a dichotomy, a paradox. Because it says it is moving, it is an unmoving one, and faster than the mind. The senses couldn't overtake it since it ran ahead. And this is something that we covered last week. I think remaining stationary, it outruns all the other runners, it being there. And then we mentioned this title of Matarishva. It allots or supports all activities. So is this a kind of contradiction in terms? How can something be unmoving and yet it moves? You see, there are some examples in modern science about it called quantum entanglement. Difficult to conceive of if you think of things in a causal linear way, that things should be like this and things should be like that. Everything is measured in this world of ours according to a certain speed limit, 186,000 miles per second, the speed of light. Nothing can go faster than the speed of light. But here we are told that there's something that seems to go faster than the speed of light without traveling. It's exactly the language of modern physics, modern science. So when two particles, subatomic particles, engage in each other, no matter how far you separate them, the activity, that is what is described as spin, say, is a property. It's an energetic property. Some particles have half spin, some have whole integer spin. So it is the fermions have half spin, and the other particles will have a full spin. But regardless, if you change the property in one thing, the other one automatically, simultaneously, at the same time changes. And this is now proven. Absolutely. John Bell, who was a Northern Irish man, he managed to put this forward and attend to it after Einstein, Podolsky, and Rosen, it was called the EPR paradox, challenged it and said, look, you're violating a fundamental principle in physics, namely the speed of light. Nothing can go faster than the speed of light. You have a problem. And yet, you see, and of course, Einstein was calling it the famous spooky action at a distance. I can't believe in spooky action at a distance. And yet we absolutely know that entanglement occurs when you change the spin of the one particle exactly at the same time, not with any delay. At the same time, the other one changes. It goes opposite, as if it knows. Einstein had the idea that these must be already pre-existing pairs. They must know each other anyway, intimately. And so naturally, when you change the one, you change the other. But there's a time lapse that has to occur. Now here we're telling exactly the same thing. That without moving, it moves, as it were, faster than the mind. We have to insert as it were, so that it means it's everywhere, without moving. In other words, because of its presence, things move. It is also a mover. So we have that particular statement. Anijal akam maso javiyo nidad deva apnuan purva masat. The spirit, that is unmoving, swifter than the mind. Even if you think faster than speed of light is thought. There's nothing faster than that. So the fastest thing that we know of, it outruns that. It's already ahead. It's already there. Though itself standing still, it outstrips those who run, and in it all the pervading air supports the activities of all being. Not only does it remain unmoving, and yet it is everywhere, but not only that, it moves by its presence, it moves all the other activities. It's that whose activity sustains all life, on which all cause and effects depend, and which all these inhere, which is called a thread, which supports all the worlds through which it runs. This idea of a thread is there in Bhagavad Gita and other places. What is that thread? What is that sutra? Yajnavalkya is asked in the Prataranuk Upanishad. And for Shankarananda, Matishram is Sutratman, the thing that is the common thread everywhere. We used to think that space was the common thread everywhere. To some extent, we still think that. Even in the atom, you'll be surprised that you see the human body is made from cells. Cells are made from molecules. Central molecule is the DNA molecule. And all these molecules are made from atoms. And if you take a single atom, let us take the simplest atom, hydrogen atom, which we know is, has a kind of spherical field shape. Its field is something like, we can think of it as a spherical way. So that means the heart of it, the proton that sits in the middle, as it were. If you take the whole of, I think I mentioned before, Croke Park Stadium, and you put that single, the size of a tennis ball, let's say the size of a tennis ball, you put that in the middle of an unknown space. Let's move the example, not say Croke Park. Croke Park, you'd have to go smaller. So you take in an empty field, or empty space, you put this thing called a proton, then the sphere is 8 kilometers wide, which means the electron is somewhere 4 kilometers on the one side, 4 kilometers on the other side. You get the idea. What's in between? Nothing, just empty space. We don't look like empty space. Sometimes we look like empty heads, but we are largely empty space. This is the nature of our delusion. Our interpretation is only very limited. We're only catching the very, very minute crest of a wave, if you want to think of it like that. And that's our whole world that we know of. So how to discover something deeper? Now that Supreme then, although is one essence, has two natures, seemingly, an eternal, immutable, one of unceasing change, stillness and movement. It's immovable in itself, and all things are moved from it. But the unity and manifoldness are both aspects of the life divine, and we shouldn't think of one to the exclusion of the other, or the other to the exclusion of the one. And so it goes on. Tad ijati, tan ayajati, tad dure, tad vad antike. It moves not. It is far and it is near. It is within all this, is also outside all of this. The apparently contradictory statements are not suggestive of any mental imbalance or anything like that, but it's just the fact that we don't catch, but yet it is comforting. Because if we transpose that and become devotees and say, instead of saying it, a neuter gender, we say he or she, means that is always near. It is never far away. And the Vedanta Deshika, it quotes two verses to show the distance and the intimacy at the same time of the Supreme. So therefore, if you say, where is God far away, that would be a mistake. A child would think that. And when I say child, I mean also adult child. People who haven't really gone deeper in their religious understanding from a child. They have to outgrow that idea of the old man in the sky, who unfortunately is very senile and has been there since Genesis. And we have to do everything for him. He made a foolish world. And so, unfortunately, and he doesn't do Twitter or anything like that. That's very old-fashioned. He's been there since Genesis. He knows nothing about this. Then you see, here is a beautiful, beautiful statement, which is a very core and key statement to the whole of this. And that is this, yastu sarvani bhutani atmani evanu pashyati. This is a very, very telling statement. He who sees all beings in his own self and his own self in all beings does not feel any revulsion by reason of such a view. So let us examine this a little bit more. So that is the sixth stanza. It goes hand in hand with the seventh. The two go together. This world is beset by all kinds of hatred because we see this division. What is the cause of our hatred? What is the cause of warfare? What is the cause of injustices and suffering? It's because we see things as divided and different. And even religion falls into that trap. I've said many times before, it is the priest, the pundit, and the mullah that wants to divide everything. It is the mystic and the philosopher that wants to unite everything. You might even say in modern sciences, the particle physicist that wants to divide everything. And it is the theoretical physicist or the cosmologist who wants to unite everything. So this is worth meditating on. Now I'll just pause there because I mentioned previously, this purpose of all these Upanishads will be this anubhuti, this cognitive experience, direct experience. How do we get there? We get there by carefully listening to these profound words contained in the Upanishads. But just to gloss over it and merely read it is not enough. We have to reflect, we have to contemplate on this. And then we have to meditate on this with that idea of cognitive experience. So even this one stanza is worth contemplating deeply on it. Because in this one stanza, do we find the panacea for all our sufferings? Our outlook has to change. If you see all beings in the very self, and if you see the self in all beings, and this is repeated over and over again, the Bhagavad Gita in the 6th chapter, the 30th stanza, repeats this whole thing. And Vijugupsate, you has no doubts about it. That's the point. You have to convince yourself. In practical life, when you go about your so-called daily business, every person you encounter, every face you encounter, you need to see this. Oh Lord, you're there. I am looking at you and you're looking at me. Every object that you see. It's interesting that people's mood shifts from winter to summer and their clothing shifts. 16 degrees in Ireland is enough for people to bring out white legs and all kinds of things. That rapidly turns pink to orange to red. But the whole mood changes, a certain more atmosphere of freedom, where the sun rises very, very early in the morning, 4:30 or not, and then sets ultimately something like 10 o'clock in the evening as it happens. The longest day being the summer solstice. So how is it that our mood shifts? How is it that we become more optimistic? I never used to understand it living in Africa because we have 2 seasons and the sky is mostly blue. We have the rainy season and the dry season. But in Ireland, the summer season is our winter season. That is, it feels exactly the same kind of temperature and we feel extremely cold. But you see here, it is summer and you're acclimatized to it. I remember before Swami Purnananda came, so I asked him, he was still in India. I said, how are you? He said, oh, I'm not that well. It's very, very cold here. Oh, I said, oh, that's a pity, you know. What is your temperature? Oh, he says 19 degrees. I laughed. He didn't understand, you see. Now, of course, he understands. So it's all very relative. But what lifts our mood up is because we see things in a brighter way. And so if we are able to practice this one thing, that in every person, in every place, in every object, we see the face of God shining back at us, the sun shining on us and back at us. Seeing that in everybody, practicing this. Personally, when I first understood this, it was a wonderful joy for me. Everywhere I went, when I was traveling or whatever it was, I repeated that kind of concept. And I saw that in a tree, I saw that in a flower, I saw that in air, I saw that in a person. Everywhere, I had a double take. You can see a person and then second take, oh Lord, you are there. In that order. So, sarvani bhutani, in all beings, not just in humans. This is the great, great difference. In all beings, in everything that moves, is a marvel, is a miracle. And the more we study it, the more marvelous it becomes, the more joyful it becomes. What a great joy when you feel. And for those who are far away from feelings, you have to replace seeing with feeling. Feel that same self you won't go and unnecessarily attack yourself. Only when you see that the self is in the other and everywhere, in everything, through everything. The ultimate conclusion is as everything and then beyond it. And so the next verse also expresses the same purport. It tells us, Yasmin Sarvani Bhutani, it goes on like that. When to one who knows all beings have truly become one with his own self, then a question arises. What delusion can there be? All your delusion will have gone. And also, more importantly, what sorrow can there be for? And this is the most important statement here, a beautiful statement. Ekat Vamanu Pashyataha, the seer of oneness. What sorrow can remain for that? Ekatvam Manu Pashyataha, seer of oneness. So that verse indicates that what the self spoken of in previous verses really is your own nature. Why are we repeating this over and over again? Because of its significance, its importance, its depth. Because as soon as you really grasp that, your whole valuation of things changes, your whole view changes, and as it changes, you get joy from it. All of the pessimism, all of the negativity goes away as a result. And then this wonderful 8th verse. And I'm told that's where we left off, so worth repeating all these things. So let us look at the 8th verse that really concludes a section. That section is to do with that the Supreme is immanent and transcendent, both. Sa paryagach chukram akayam avranam ashnaviram shuddham apaba vidyam. He has filled all. He is radiant, bodiless, invulnerable, devoid of sinews, pure, untouched by evil. So let us go through that again. All pervasive. That means there's no place where he's not, even in the empty space, so-called. Pure, that is not tainted by anything else. Pureness indicates oneness. There's no body. Bodiness without wound, as if you didn't know. Well, without wound, without sinews. Again, absolutely taintless. A body, if you think a body is pure and taintless, please bear this in mind, that in your hair here and the hair follicles, there are many, many citizens called mites, all eating away at your skin. Very attractive. And inside you, you're carrying a septic tank, moving around with that. These things are not told in the era or the area of romantic dinners. And yet it's a fact. So we are deluded necessarily, otherwise nobody would look into the other molecules across a table called eyes and say, what beautiful eyes you have. Untouched by any sin, untouched by any behavioral aberration or affectations, omniscient, present everywhere, and ruler of the mind. If it's ruler of the mind, how is it that our mind is uncontrolled? So the ruler of the mind in the sense that everything comes from this, the whole universe has come from a single mind. Transcendent, self-existent, has duly allocated or allotted all the respective duties within the universe, and for our purpose, the human body is a microcosmic universe. All the respective duties to all the eternal years, that is, to all the creators, because this whole universe, according to the cosmology of the Vedas, goes back to a potentiality, a latent quiescence, and then emerges again. At the end of a lifetime of a creator, a new creator comes about. Somebody deserving of it. You can think of it in this way. So now there's a huge commentary. Those who are following these 8 Upanishads, you'll see a number of words in here, and we won't highlight all of it. We'll just take some salient characteristics. So it goes on like this. It points out that omniscience means the seer of the past and also the seer of all. That is he who knows the past, the present, and the future. That is described by Shankaracharya as Kavihi Kranta Darshi Sadvak Drik. He has intuitive wisdom, while Manisi is the thinker. And it goes on, Manisi Manasa Ishita Sarvajna Ishvaraha. Prabhu, all pervading, as the cosmic soul, he pervades the entire universe. The omnipresent Lord allotted different functions to the various and the eternal creators, the Prajapatis. We have to also refer in this, we were studying at one point the Prashna Upanishad, and Prashna Upanishad 1, stanza 9, will elucidate on this particular fact. So going back then, it's a summary of the commentary I've just given you. See, the first purport of the Vedas is devotedness to knowledge after renouncing all desires. And this idea has been expressed by the first verse. This is the commentator. Thus, all this should be covered by the Lord. We go back to that first reference. And do not covet anybody's wealth. And the second purport of the Vedas is that in case that devotedness to knowledge is impossible for a person of not such keen intellect, they should be continuous in the path of duty. That's stated in the second verse. And then going on from there, so he's reviewing all these other things, but there's a wonderful reference here. What shall we achieve through children? We to whom the self which we have attained is the goal. So he's quoting from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, section 4, endorsing this idea of maybe the ideal way of tackling this problem. If you have keen intellect, sharp intellect, and a thirst or a will to renounce in a withdrawing way or a dedicated way. There's an objection that is comes about. How is it again known that it is not meant for all? So he's discussing actually these original first stanzas, just so you understand what the commentary is about and why it is so big. But it's mentioning here this seer of oneness. When to the man of realization all beings become the very self, then what delusion and what sorrow can there be for such a seer of oneness? And so highlighting that particular phrase that I've already highlighted, the condemnation of the ignorant, etc., is also done here with a view to achieving a combination of various systems. Mentioning it, he says, Vidya, that is worship or meditation, and as to that, not the knowledge of the Supreme Self, but the thing that is the divine possession, the meditation on the various glories of God or various glories of the ultimate. The next question that arises then is, what happens then if you fall short of all of this? There are two possible avenues that you can go on. So this 8th stanza, just going back to that, implies that there is a seer, that is a seer, that there is a witness. It implies that there is a thinker. It implies that there is a harmonizer. And no further action need be done by us because everything is nicely organized well. Everything is self-existent and has duly been distributed through endless years, the objects according to their nature. So now, ignorance and knowledge is the next subject taking up from the 9th stanza. Those who worship avidya, that is ignorance, lack of knowledge, vidya, knowledge, avidya, the opposite, and in brackets, the translation has put rights. That is, if you're doing any action for selfish gain, you enter into blinding darkness because you have taken this world as the reality. Don't forget my original statement. If God is big, the world is small. If the world is big, then God is small. It's all proportion. So they enter into blinding darkness because ignorance compared to blindness and blinding darkness. But into greater darkness than they are those who are engaged in vidya. Now here the commentator puts meditation, or the translation puts meditation, but let's look at it this way. I mentioned the arrogance. That was somebody who says, I know there is only this that exists and there's nothing more than this. When somebody says, I am wise, it means all you lot of fools. So that's great, great arrogance, and that's even blinding darkness. You're endorsing now with a false dichotomy, this ignorance. So that means you go into blinding darkness. And if you see there's a difference, a duality between ignorance and knowledge, you haven't got it either. So that stanza will go, Andam tamaha pravi shanti yo vidyam upasati tato bhuya eva te tamo ya upijayam rataha. Into blinding darkness, into those who worship ignorance, and those who delight in knowledge enter into still greater darkness, as it were. Of course, Shankaracharya here interprets this avidya to mean these rites. That is ceremonial piety. That's why that's put in brackets. But it amounts to the same thing. Why am I engaging in this? It's like praying, give me this, give me this, give me this, continuously. Enhance my condition now, and even not now, but in the afterlife also. Those dedicated to rites, contrasting this karma kanda of the Vedas, this orientation around rites in order to gain, in order for gain. That's the motive. Versus the jnana kanda, that is the knowledge portion, the portion dedicated to wisdom. So into blinding darkness, into those who worship ignorance, and those who delight in knowledge enter into still greater darkness. And then we go to the other one, the other stanza that accompanies it. But I have to mention that the state of those who are lost in ignorance and cling to external props, those people you'll find in religion itself, is pitiable, but the state of those who are intellectually learned, there's an arrogance about that, you see. That is spiritually worse. The darkness of intellectual conceit is worse than that of ignorance, just to be sure about it. Now, anyad evahu vidyaya anyad aha avidyaya iti shushruma dhiran yenastad vijakakshir. Distinct indeed, they say, is the result of knowledge, and distinct, they say, is the result of ignorance. And in case you think that there's an arrogance in the person stating it, he also says, the wise have said this, those who know. We can't grasp the nature of ultimate reality by either discursive knowledge, debate, discussion, intellectualizing, intellectual gymnastics in philosophy, making suggested proposals about the suggested nature of something, cogitating on it. This is a characteristic of Western philosophy. So that's a great danger. Knowledge and ignorance, he who knows the two together, these two things that are mentioned as duality, crosses death through ignorance and attains life through knowledge. That is ignorance, that is looking at the world as it is, as an apparitional existence, and on the other side, knowledge. On the one side, philosophy sometimes declare that this is non-existence. And seeing that, you say, okay, so there is this understanding of it, and on the other side is this knowledge. If you see this duality, you haven't got it. When all that duality goes away, you've got it. Knowledge and ignorance, these are pairs of opposites. The things which are hidden and the things which are projected, these are supplemented by sattva, that is the illuminating factor of it. Now I have a question here, John Cunningham. We also have 2 seasons in Ireland, 6 months of winter and 6 months of bad weather. Okay, thanks, John. Thanks for that. Very good. Yeah. Summer sometimes lasts about, I think, about 2 days, but we've had an extended summer this time. That's okay. All right. Into blinding darkness, into those who worship the unmanifest, laboring this point. 2 things are there, the manifest, the unmanifest. Into blinding darkness, into those who worship the unmanifest, just the world. That is the pantheists, the naturalists, the physicalists, the materialists. And into still greater darkness, as it were, those who delight in the manifest. So the unmanifest, those who say, okay, even on the other side, that there is only non-duality and don't see the manifest. And those who only see the manifest and don't see the unmanifest, both of them are really incorrect, are wrong. Anyat evahu sambhavat, anyat ahur asambhavat. Distinct, they say, is what results from the manifest. Distinct, they say, is what results from the unmanifest. And thus have we heard from those wise ones who explained it to us. So if you understand the manifest and the unmanifest both together. Now, very often in philosophy, there is this misunderstanding that I presented before, that those who subscribe to Advaita, and I've come across this, say that this whole thing is illusion, and it's only this non-duality, and so all your pain and suffering, don't worry about it because it's not really there. That's on the extreme side of things, and Vedanta is often interpreted in this non-dualistic way, and this verse tells us very clearly, no. And Ramakrishna puts it in a beautiful way. He says on the one side is Nitya, the eternal, on the other side is Leela, the manifest. We have to understand both of these. That means this world is the same thing. Now we've gone from seeing this self in all beings and all beings in the self. We've gone from there to seeing that it is through everything. And now we have gone to see it is as everything. There is no distinction between the manifest and the unmanifest at the end of the day. So we'll leave it there. Next week, we'll finish our conclusion on it. And then we'll review it by having a more open discussion on it. So I'm going to mute the mic just to get your comments and your questions at the very end now.
Swamiji, I was a bit taken aback by the translation of this word vidya being meditation, and then using this meditation to say that it leads to blinding darkness.
Yes, okay. So vidya is interpreted in this way. So meditation on what subject? I think it's incorrect to think that meditation is a panacea, because if you take Ravana, he was a meditator. What was he meditating on? So this idea of knowledge, it means, you see, intellectual meditation and nothing further. And meditation is taken in a different way. Meditation can be applied to both the what we call the ignorance and also the knowledge. Now, I can ask you a counter question. The whole of Ireland at the moment, in fact, the whole of the world, and let's exaggerate it, the whole of India is in meditation at the moment. What do you think they might be meditating on?
COVID, Swamiji.
Exactly, correct answer. Go to the top of the class.
Thank you, Swami.
That's what they're meditating on, you see. If you shift your position along the lines of this Upanishad and say that these are equal things, this ignorance and this knowledge are equal things, transcended, see things in a different way, then the COVID crisis will not be a crisis at all. You'll only see there the fullness and freedom which is declared at the very beginning of this Upanishad in this prayer, this Purnamadam. This is full. And then that is full. From fullness comes fullness. There is an art of spiritual healing. You see, there have been people who request, can we not have a prayer for the COVID virus? And before it was so prominent as a second wave, critical wave in India, no request came like that. Now, because it's closer to home for many people, requests came like that. But what kind of mental movement will you apply to it? Will you say, Lord, may everybody be well, may people recover? Of course you can say that, no problem. And if done with faith and confidence, that has an input. But if you really want an effect, you'll say, there is fullness and freedom there. And when I see that perfection there, that's all I require. Once that happens, that comes through. So this is called spiritual healing. Spiritual healing is on the basis of, I'm seeing the perfection and fullness already there and leaving the rest. Not even anticipating that things will change. That's a higher position. The Bhagavad Gita mentions 4 types of people who are praying, 7th chapter. Mentions those who really want to get out of some difficulty, those who want to increase their knowledge, mentioned here, and those who want to increase their living conditions, their standards, here put under the general term wealth, and those others who are dearest, those who really understand this oneness, dedicated only to me, says Krishna. That's also a kind of prayer. So it's a question, all of them are dear, all of them are legitimate. But these are gradations, and in the gradations will be increased effectiveness. Distinct indeed, they say, is what results from the manifest, and distinct, they say, is what results from the unmanifest. Those who worship the personal God, the creator, Hiranyagarbha, they attain what is there on offer. And those who worship the unmanifest, the principle of, nature get absorbed into it. So he who understands these two things, the manifest and the unmanifest, both together, they cross over both. They cross over death through the unmanifest and attain life eternal through the manifest by using that, not by rejecting it, by using it, by evaluating things properly. So if there's a confusion about that, we'll pick it up again next week, just to make sure that there's no misunderstanding about that. And then we'll finish off with the final section, which is actually appropriately a prayer for the vision of God, using the concept of Pushan, that thing that in mythology drives the sun and drives life very appropriately. And these passages are often repeated on the demise of somebody.
Swami,
Yes.
Swami, maybe this is maybe I've got it totally wrong, but when he talks about him there, mortality different than to realization of the self that he talked about in the first verses.
In this context,
He says in 14, that he who knows both the unmanifested and the manifested together attains immortality.
yes,
So is that immortality? How does that relate to realization of the self, which is at the start?
same thing.
Yes. Okay. That's yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, see, it's expressed like that since our concern is with the issue of purpose, birth, life, and death. So we know all of that. We know the cycle of that. We're caught up in this mortality.
Hmm.
As long as we think along those lines, we won't get it. We won't catch it. So what our goal is expressed in different ways. One way will be freedom. But also freedom is freedom from death.
Yeah.
So instead of birth, life, death, birth, life, death, birth, life, death, there is immortality, the realization of immortality, because the self is never born and nor does it die. And the common question is, what happens to us when we die? A bit like asking, what happens to the RTE broadcast when my transistor breaks down? It's not a meaningful question. It is only seen to be meaningful if I assume I am this body.
Yeah.
If I am this body, I will be born, I will live, I will die. If I am the soul, that is the psyche, the sum total of all my individual experiences going on this journey of life, if I say that is who I am, then obviously I'll go and continue with that, because that is also subject to birth, life, death, birth, life, death.
Yeah. Is that like, that people who are interested in immortality as a sort of personal survival, that their way of thinking is based on an assumption that they are their body, mind, whatever.
Yes, exactly. So I heard from the other day, oh, here's something that will defeat all religion. And it's a funny idea of immortality, cryogenics. So you freeze the body for an indefinite period of time. Then after that, all the ice melts and so on and so forth. And apparently you wake the person up and he says, oh, what happens? It's a little cold in here. Yes, well, you put you on ice. So it's assuming that the body and the self is the same, and it's not. And the philosophical analysis tells us very clearly, any thinking person will understand, I cannot be the body. The very fact that we say my body is a telltale sign of it. I say my shoe, my cloth, my car. Clearly, a subject and object is being delineated and separated. I don't say I am the shoe. So the language betrays it. I can do what I like. It's my body. Well, who's the my? Who's the me? That's the point. So people get caught in their own language, their own expression. There's no possibility of you ever even imagine that you die, ever. Supposing we do an exercise like that, and I say, okay, there's a corpse there, you see, and it's your funeral, and people are singing hymns and all the rest of it. So, you know, the worst present in the world is a do-it-yourself burial kit. So anyhow, you see, there's no way you can think of it because there's always an observer looking at it. Oh, I dreamt I was dead. Okay, where were you standing in the dream? You are looking at a corpse there. That corpse looked like you, yeah? No, I myself was lying. Okay, you were aware that you were lying down on the bed. There is always a self-conscious awareness. So it's not that, you know, immortality is not a goal in the sense that already we are that. Our children of immortality is the expression in Sveta Upanishad. I have found that one. O ye children of immortality. We can view it like this, that is our inheritance, is one way of viewing it. But the ultimate is, I am that. And in this Upanishad here, it gives us one of the great Mahavakyas. It says, Soham. Yeah, I am that one. It's a great, one of the great sayings that are taken from the Upanishads.